Okay, welcome, Representative Holt. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. It's great to be with you again, Oliver.
Yeah, definitely. I think the last time we talked, we had Vivek Ramaswamy on with us.
That's right. That was a great day.
That
Yep.
was amazing. What do you
Yeah.
think of his ending his race and endorsing
Yeah.
Trump?
I think I think he's a very realistic person. I think, his campaign's been about truth, and I think he saw the writing on the wall that there wasn't a path forward. So I think he did the right thing, and I would love to see him as President Trump's VP pick. We'll see what happens, but I think he did a fantastic job in Iowa. I'm disappointed that his numbers weren't better because in my county, in Crawford County, uh, where I advocated for him and a lot of folks supported him, he came in second. He did higher. He did better in the Crawford County than he did any other place in the state. He came in second to President Trump with Governor DeSantis and Nikki Haley behind him. So, it didn't work out that way in the rest of the state. But I think he's got a huge future, and I like I said, his message resonated with me, and I hope that. I would love to see him as Trump's VP pick.
I would too, and that was my next question.
Yeah.
What do you think the odds of that are?
I don't know. I mean, I really don't have any idea. I mean, I've heard reports that he already has his VP picked, and then I've seen other reports that Vivek is on his short list, so I have no idea.
Yeah. I saw a clip from an interview with one of Trump's advisors, and he had said he'd called him, and Trump had been hearing a lot of people ask him to pick Vivek. I think Vivek really changed the conversation.
Yeah, and he's such a dynamic speaker, and he's so good at communicating our values and communicating the situation that we're in. And so I think that it would be I think it would be a fantastic pick for President Trump. But obviously, they see a lot of things that we don't see, and look at a lot of numbers we don't look at. So hopefully they'll get it right.
For sure. Yeah. And while we're on the subject, what do you think about the caucuses and some of the issues we had with Democrats switching same day? And
yeah, there's a lot of folks that would like that to be changed so that you can't change your registration on the day of the caucus because of how that can be abused. At the same time, a few years ago, it was just the opposite. A lot of people wanted to change so that they could caucus for Donald Trump, when he was running for president. So it can be a double-edged sword. It can be a positive thing or it can be a negative thing. So I certainly understand the sensitivities of folks getting upset because Democrats want to, change over and caucus so that they can affect the outcome of our caucuses. So I think that's a concern, and we definitely need to consider how we approach that going forward. But again, it can be a positive or a negative depending on the year and the situation.
Yeah, for sure. So back to Iowa, we had a pretty crazy week at the Capitol. I think let's talk about the governor's AEA proposal and where that's gone and what, maybe some of the challenges that representatives were having with it.
Yeah. Well, it's very clear from the data. The governor has clearly put out and demonstrated that we need to make changes in that system. There's no doubt about that. Although school officials would dispute some of the numbers, it would appear that our special education students are performing below a number of other states, even though we're spending more money. Now, again, that's just one of the issues. In every aspect of this issue, we have been faced with and confronted with conflicting information. So on the one hand, there's the concept that our special education students are behind other states, and we're spending on average about $5,000 more per year on those special education students. And yet the manner in which the state of Iowa takes our students off IEPs is differently than how other states do it, which can skew that data. Another thing is that $5,000 that, is stated that we're spending more than other states are to the tune of something like $5,000. That's also somewhat in dispute because the money that goes to the AEAs is used beyond things just that relate to special education services. So in every aspect of this, there has been conflicting information. And so I don't think there's any doubt that we need to improve and reform the system that was put in the 1970s. Things have changed a lot since then, and we're the only state in the country that requires our public schools to take that AEA money, pass every dime of it to the AEA, and then they're mandated to use that AEA. We're the only system that does that. And so the governor commissioned a very detailed study that recommended the changes that are in her proposal. The problem that we have, especially out here in rural Iowa, is that all of our rural legislators, our teachers, AEA personnel that deliver these services to the schools, parents, have all told us that they're extremely concerned that we need to slow the train down, that we need to listen to their voices, those that are actually the boots on the ground, or as we'd say in the Marine Corps, where the rubber meets the road. We need to listen to those folks in making a determination on what changes need to be made. We were very sensitive to that because we have to get this right. And there's no way, I cannot listen to my local school superintendents and teachers and parents on an issue like this. And so the decision of the House Education Committee was that we're not going to advance the governor's AEA proposals. We believe that we need to very carefully listen to the voices in our district and come up with a proposal that is certainly with as much certainty as possible we know will actually improve the educational outcome for our special education students. So that's where we're at.
So it's definitely started the conversation.
Oh, definitely has. And again, I think there need to be changes. I don't think there's any doubt that they're administratively top heavy. A lot of the AEAs could probably be consolidated. And, some of the AEA agency chiefs on average are making over $300,000 a year, more than the governor, more than the head of the Department of Education. Clearly, there are some issues that we need to deal with. Another thing that was very clear to me is that the vast majority of our school districts are extremely happy with the AEA services that are being provided. But there's one particular AEA, and I won't mention that name because I'm still gathering information, but there's one particular AEA that the school districts are not happy with. And with the governor's proposal, that AEA, that school district would be able to go to a different AEA to get those services if they're not happy with their AEA. So there's some really valid things in the governor's proposals. It's not that that's not the case. It's just that we just feel like there needs to be way more input from local folks and rural school districts before we make these monumental decisions.
Yeah, and I think a lot of representatives that I spoke with supported the idea and recognized that there needed to be changes made, but we're concerned with a few things in the bill that maybe could have some improvement. So,
yeah, but another thing I'll tell you that one of the main concerns was transferring the oversight over to the Department of Education. We have a great new director, and Iowa Department of Education Director Snow is fantastic, but there's just no confidence right now in the Iowa Department of Education to provide oversight and administer these services because they just don't have a good track record. The Iowa Department of Education, all my rural school districts tell me that they have been very unresponsive to their needs over the years, and so they don't trust them. And one of the things that one of my superintendents said was, I can call my local AEA guy at 10 o'clock at night and talk to him about a student we're concerned with and work things out. How's that going to work when it transfers to Des Moines? And so centralization of authority like that may or may not be a good idea. And so that's one of the things we've got to be very careful with when we're moving forward.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. How about the ending guaranteed wage programs in Iowa? Your bill's making a fast track on that one.
Well, it was a lot of fun this week on that one. So, it came to my attention. I read a newspaper article that, their guaranteed income programs have begun in Iowa and some of our bigger cities, Des Moines area, some other counties. So far, I think they've spent over $800,000 of taxpayer money on these programs. And basically they identified, I think it was 24 families, and they just handed $500 a month. No work requirements, no requirements for anything that I'm aware of. This is, a really leftist idea, and it's socialism on steroids, as I've said over and over again. And there's no way that doesn't damage the work ethic. I don't understand why people don't see that these type of programs, while it could be that the folks behind them mean well, but the reality for me is that these programs assault the work ethic, and they encourage and foster dependence on government as opposed to independence, and that is not good. And I think these type of programs will actually increase poverty, not decrease poverty. I'm reminded of some books I read back in the 80s about the Soviet Union and how farmers would leave a portion of their crops in the field to rot because no matter how hard they worked, the government came along and took most of their of their wealth and left just enough for them to live on. So there was no incentive whatsoever for them to work hard. And that's sort of what this reminds me of. We've got employers all over the state of Iowa that can't find people to work. They have to hire 5 people just to get one to show up. So the work ethic in our young people is horrific. I don't think there's any doubt about that to anybody that looks at the landscape today. When I was growing up in the 70s, we were excited to have a job, and we understood that we had to show up for work and that we had to work ourselves up. And that's just not understood today. There's no respect for the work ethic. And I believe that the left is working very hard to change equal opportunity, which has always been the principle in this country. They're working really hard to change equal opportunity to equal outcome. Everybody, it's wrong that this person has a bigger house than this person. Well, wait a minute. That's the American way. How hard you are willing to work based on your God-given talents, that's equal opportunity. We don't want equal outcome. That's socialism. That's garbage. And that's what I think these guaranteed income programs encourage. And so the bill that I'm running would not allow any guaranteed income programs to continue in Iowa. We did amend the bill so that any guaranteed income programs currently underway would have until January 1st, 2025, and then they have to be ended. And the reason I did that was just some concern for the people that might be on these programs, and they're using that $500. Maybe they're depending on that for their situation. And I didn't want to just cut that off immediately. So at least give them a few months to readjust their budgets or whatever. So it did move out of the Judiciary Committee. I think we had one Republican that voted against it, and all Democrats voted against it. But it'll now hopefully go to the floor of the House and pass and be sent over to the Senate.
Yeah, that's a good one. I testified at the subcommittee on that one, so I'm glad it's moving forward. Yeah. We don't need to become like California and some of these states where they're paying people to stay home, and we have so many job openings across Iowa.
Yeah, we can look at the state. Look at the state of California. As wealthy as they are, they're running deficits, and these things aren't sustainable. I mean, when you pay somebody $500 just to sit on their backside, that doesn't work, and people ought to know that. It's just human nature that doesn't work.
And we have programs for people with disabilities and programs for people that can't work, right?
Yeah. And that's not what we're talking about. We want to be able to help those in need. And, you kind of follow the biblical model. It's always better to teach somebody how to fish as opposed to handing them a fish. But as the Bible would have referred to it as widows and orphans. But, we want to help people that are truly in need, and how much more we could help those in need if we could get rid of the fraud in the system and those who are as perfectly capable of working as you and I are, Oliver. And there's a lot of folks like that are taking advantage of the system, and we all know it. Just like there's a lot of folks that are on disability and we see them out replacing their roof, it's like, what? So, I hear these stories all the time from my constituents. My next door neighbor's on disability, but he's up on the roof replacing his roof, and he's doing all this stuff. It's just that there's so much abuse, and this is hardworking taxpayers' money. I'll tell you one of the stories that came out of the committee that just blew me away. One of the Democrat representatives said maybe this $500 could be used for a family to buy their son or daughter a saxophone. I'm sitting there thinking, so it's okay for you that this $500 comes out of a taxpayer's wallet that are working hard to take care of their own children and goes to someone else's family to buy them a saxophone. I mean, it doesn't make any sense to me. And it's a very different mindset between Democrats and Republicans on this issue.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Sometimes we have to not buy the saxophone and rent it. It's, we've had to do that. You can't just go buy a saxophone with your neighbor's dollars. That's for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the other arguments against it was a minimum wage, that it was Republicans' fault that these minimum income programs were necessary because we hadn't raised the minimum wage, which, I kind of railed on because the minimum wage was never intended to be a wage you could buy a house on or, raise a family on. It's called a minimum wage for a reason. And no matter what the government artificially raises that to, it's always going to be the minimum wage. So if you raise the minimum wage to $30 an hour, how much do we think a hamburger is going to cost at McDonald's, or how much do we think groceries are going to cost when we do those things. It doesn't make any sense. It's like they don't understand economics 101, but that's what we deal with.
Yeah, I know a few McDonald's owners, and I think one of them told me they were starting at $18 an hour or
Mm-hmm.
something
Mm-hmm.
like that.
Yeah, well, I think I see signs in the windows that it's $12 an hour in some of the McDonald's around here, different businesses around here. So the government artificially raising a minimum wage does not lift people out of poverty. Hard work, being the most invaluable worker there. I remember a great story when I worked at Kentucky Fried Chicken, Oliver, when I was in high school. And I remember the gentleman who was over the 15 stores and was making six figures in the 70s. He started out as, just cooking chicken in Kentucky Fried Chicken. And he worked so hard that, he was now over 13 stores. That's how you do it. It's not
Yeah.
government.
Yeah, it is how you do it. And my kids were making $9 an hour working at Jimmy John's during the summers when they were in high school. And that's for extra money. I mean, that's for learning how to show up on time, learning to have a good work ethic. I don't think that those jobs were really meant for, being able to rent an apartment and
Absolutely
subsidize your living expenses. Somebody had once told me, well, they should be making $20 an hour. And I thought, I said, well, how much do you think your sandwich would cost or your sub would cost if they were making $20 an hour?
That's exactly right. By the way, if you hear a crying baby, that's my granddaughter.
I did hear that.
Yeah.
Didn't know if that was a cat or if
No, yeah, that's Waverly. She's playing, having a good time right now.
How old is she?
She's 6 months right now.
Oh man, yeah. Handful.
Yeah,
always good to have grandparents around.
absolutely.
We've got a grandson, and occasionally I come home and he's here, and my stepdaughter just needs help, or she's busy, or she's running some errands, or has a meeting, and she's got twins on the way, so my wife's going to be very busy.
Oh, absolutely. It's a great busy. It's a great kind of busy.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, so we had the gender identity bill that you went ahead and passed in the subcommittee, and that was pretty interesting. And it's always interesting to hear the testimony of these trans activists. What were your thoughts on that? What were your thoughts on the outcome?
Well, as chair of judiciary, I've resisted for a number of years assigning a bill to subcommittee that would strip gender identity as protected class. I would never have voted to put it there. And I have a problem with protected classes anyway, because I think they elevate the protected group's rights above everybody else. And I don't understand how that's constitutional, equal protection under the law. I've had those discussions with some Supreme Court justices in Iowa, and they agree that it produced a constitutional conundrum. But there was it was done in reaction to groups of people who had been, had been discriminated against for long periods of time. So I get it, but we find ourselves in a place now where protected classes have their rights elevated above others, and it causes a lot of problems in our culture, in our society. So, my conclusion, and I wrote this in an editorial in response to the Des Moines Register. I put it in my newsletter a few days ago. My decision to greenlight Representative Jeff Shipley's bill to remove gender identity as protected class and then classify gender dysphoria as a disability in Iowa code. My reason for doing that was because I believe that militants in the transgender movement have made the decision to change the discussion. I think at the beginning it was just let me be me, and now it is just let me be me and you must agree. And they're using gender identity as protected class and code to force others into their alternate version of reality. And it's forcing our daughters to have to use changing facilities with biological men who are stripping naked in front of them. And it's erasing women. It's erasing women's rights. It's erasing the gains that we've made. And it's incredible to me. This is being aided and abetted by liberals who previously were fighting for women's rights. So I made the decision based upon the increasing militancy and the increasing number of folks I hear from whose daughters are having to be forced into extremely unsafe and uncomfortable situations in changing facilities. I greenlighted that bill for subcommittee. It did not advance because there are a number of issues we have to answer related to putting gender dysphoria as a disability in code. And frankly, we do not have the votes to advance stripping gender identity as protected class from code. But I think we need to continue to have this conversation because something has to be done. It is We do not solve discrimination by discriminating against other people. And we're not going to solve discrimination against the transgender community by discriminating against our daughters and insisting that they use changing facilities with biological men. We've reached a level of insanity today that people have to start calling out. And we're going to, folks that call it out are going to be called transphobic, and they're going to be called all these names, they're hateful and everything else. But the reality is that I do not want discrimination against the transgender community. I absolutely do not. But if a member of the transgender community is going to insist that a biological male with their full anatomy should be allowed to use the changing facility with our daughters, then I'm a hell no. And that's why I greenlighted the legislation. Again, it didn't pass subcommittee, but we need to continue to have this discussion because something has to be done to respond to the insanity. When you look at, and the other thing with the discrimination issue and the hate, I mean, look at what has happened to Riley Gaines. The hate is coming, unfortunately, from the transgender community as well. The militants in the transgender community are kind of going nuts in a lot of ways. They've locked Riley Gaines and allowed and did not allow her to leave. They have assaulted her. So the hate and discrimination, I think you could make an argument. It's pretty strongly coming from the transgender community these days, at least from militants in that group. And so we need to start speaking truth to this, and that's why I greenlighted the legislation.
We do need to speak truth to it, and we need to quit apologizing for supporting the fact that there are two genders.
Correct. And that's one of Vivek Ramaswamy's truths. There are two genders.
There are two genders. Yeah, one of the reasons why I resonated with his message was because it was just so crystal clear and so truthful. And I think the more people that stand up, the better. And you can stand up with compassion. You can stand up with understanding, but celebrating someone's mental disability, turning them into heroes is not helping. Exactly. When I listened to those comments the other day and those testimonies, I was just floored that there were no women's rights activists there. To your point, I've interviewed a young woman and her mother. I've talked to other students that are being made or forced to share facilities with biological males, and these aren't males that look like women. These aren't males that have gender dysphoria or a card or a diagnosis or anything like that. That's part of the problem with gender identity in the Civil Rights Code as a protected class is there's no clear definition of what it is. I could go down to Target right now, throw on some lip gloss and eyeliner or nothing, or just like I am, use the women's bathroom.
Right.
And there's nothing they could do about it because I could say, no, look, I identify as a woman. Right. Oh, when did you start doing that? Well, today.
Yeah, that's right. Well, with gender fluidity, you can change from day to day. Yeah. And then you can be in the workplace and misgender someone, and you can be brought up. They can file a complaint against you because this gender identity is protected class and now the Civil Rights Code. And from a perspective of a person of faith with firmly held religious beliefs, I would have a hard time if there's a biological male in front of me and they're presenting as a biological male and they want me to call them female pronouns. That would probably. Not probably, that would be against my firmly held religious beliefs. That's another issue here. When you've got gender identity as protected class and we have women being told, and I was just told about this story a few weeks ago, as you well know, Oliver, women are being told, well, you don't matter. It's too bad because gender identity is protected class in Iowa code. So you'll have to find another place to change your clothes. This is unbelievable that we're allowing this in this country. It's unbelievable that we're allowing our daughters to go through this. It has to change. And so that's why I sort of broke the glass ceiling, if you want to call it that, and advanced the bill because I think we need to have this discussion. There's 24 other states, 27 or 28 other states that do not have gender identity as a protected class in code. That doesn't greenlight discrimination against them. There's plenty of other places in federal code and state law that prohibit discrimination, prohibit violence against people. So that's not going to be tolerated against the transgender community, whether that is in code or not. But what is happening because that is in code is that our daughters are being told, you just have to accept that a biological male is going to strip naked in front of you. And if you have a problem with it, it's your problem. Everything's upside down in the country right now.
And not
So
only do
yeah,
they have to accept it, they're made to feel like criminals for questioning it.
yeah,
It's like you're the
exactly.
bad guy.
That's
Just
right.
don't look, or just go
Yeah,
find another bathroom. In the case of the mother and daughter, her 16-year-old was also working at the college. The daughter was a junior at the college, and she worked at the college. And they basically said, well, gender identity is a protected class. You're just going to have to get used
yeah.
to it.
And why would anyone have come to that hearing in support of this legislation? Why would anyone have come? There were hundreds of transgender activists shouting all sorts of profanities. I mean, it's amazing, and there were some that were respectful. Please don't get me wrong, but it is. I just wish that the people of Iowa could come and see, at least where the hate is coming from. It's not just that there's hateful people on all sides of any issue, but the idea that the transgender community they just want to be left alone to be themselves doesn't seem to be accurate to me when I look at what happens at
No,
the state
all they have
capitol.
to
And
do
that,
is go read the comments on the bill and
yeah,
see the disgusting things that these people are saying. Basically,
yeah, and
they rile up a small percentage. They're very good at mobilizing them, and then they trash legislators. They trash people who are against all this stuff. And the thing is, I mean, and I list, psychiatrists. This whole thing has infiltrated our social media, education system, medical system at the highest level. And these kids are being bombarded with all this propaganda and indoctrination. And that's why there's such an issue right now. And for,
absolutely,
I don't know, I mean, in the case of Chloe Cole, I interviewed Chloe Cole. I did a public forum with her. It was Instagram at a young age. It was being exposed to pornography on her phone. It was these groups that celebrated her for, or taught her to question her identity, then celebrated her for it. Then the medical community, it was affirm and assist, accept her personal diagnosis. They strong armed her parents into thinking that she would commit suicide if they didn't help her in her transition. Cross sex hormones, puberty blockers. By 15, they had removed her breasts. And she woke up one day realizing how she had been coerced and pushed down this road and feeling terrible. And then when she decided she was uncertain about it and wanting to detransition, the medical community didn't help her detransition. And the trans community attacked her, threatened her life. I mean, just amazing how this system works right now.
yeah. And the scenario you just described is exactly why I helped write and floor manage legislation in the last session to make that illegal for minors in the state of Iowa to have these surgeries and have the puberty blockers and all this stuff because informed consent just is not impossible is not possible in the environment we're in and the British Medical Journal said puberty blockers are being used for gender dysphoria in the context of profound scientific ignorance, and so there's no reason to allow minors to have these procedures in the state of Iowa, and so that's why we outlawed it. But
Yeah.
it's incredible. I mean, everybody's being bullied into silence, and that's the amazing thing to me that the transgender. And again, I know that there are people that discriminate against people that are transgender. I don't want that. Nobody wants that. And
No, nobody wants that.
right.
And
But the reality is everybody's afraid to speak up now. Everybody's afraid to speak up to a tiny vocal minority. They're afraid to speak up and say, no, we're not going to let our daughters be in this position. We're not going to let our daughters be erased. And we're not going to let men who, if they were competing as men, wouldn't even place. We're not going to allow them to decide that they're women so that they can stand up on a podium with a medal. It's absolutely ridiculous. And we need to stand up for truth.
yes, that's one of the things I liked about Vivek's message was it was all about truth. And I saw him talk to a young woman who asked him what he thought about the LGBTQ community, and he said, "Well, it's two communities. It's not one community. It's the LGB community, and then it's the TQ plus IA, et cetera, community." And we see that in, I don't know if you're familiar with the group Gays Against Groomers, but
Yes.
they have over 1 million members of lesbian, gay, and bisexual people that are against the grooming of children, are against this hijacking of their original movement.
Right.
Um, and so it's not, you know, just because someone's gay doesn't mean they're for all this stuff that's going
Absolutely.
on.
That's absolutely true. But that's the slippery slope. I mean, that's the slippery slope, and how that's my point about militants in the movement that are taking this to a place that those who voted to put gender identity as a protected class in the Civil Rights Code could never have envisioned, or probably never envisioned, what is taking place today. And that's why we have to do something.
Why do you think it didn't pass subcommittee?
Well, there's a number of issues related to taking gender dysphoria and putting it as a disability. That really needs to be examined further. But again, there's just a lot of people, very well intentioned, very well meaning. There's a lot of representatives who do not want to see what is happening to our daughters, do not want this to be happening. But at the same time, they're deeply concerned that stripping gender identity as a protected class would be looked upon as green lighting discrimination, would be looked upon as Iowa saying it's okay to discriminate and be hateful toward the transgender community. And so they fear that message. And I understand that. That's the reason that for a number of years I would not advance it, because I received some heartbreaking emails from members of the transgender community who were afraid that their children were going to be hated, and there was going to be discrimination against them, and there were going to be violence against them if we did this. And so this resonates with folks, and I understand that. And
And
nobody
don't we already
wants
have
that.
laws against that?
That's right. As I said, there's 22 something between 27 and 28 states, depending on how you look at it. Something between 27 and 28 states do not have protections, do not have gender identity as protected class in code, but they have other laws, just like Iowa does, against violence, against discrimination, against these things, just like federal law does. So it would not greenlight any of those things, but those are the concerns, and just the message that it sends. Okay, it may very well not. It doesn't greenlight discrimination in any way, but people are concerned about the message that would send. And so, I understand that. I am at the point where I do not agree with it anymore, because I think we have to stand up for our daughters, and we have to stand up for truth in this situation, because it's not going to get any better. It's only going to get worse, because it's just the slippery slope is going to continue its downward spiral. So we have to do this, or we have to do something. And I don't want any of your listeners to believe, or viewers, that we have the votes to do that, because we do not. We do not have the votes to do that. But it has begun the discussion, and I'm going to continue to highlight that while I am deeply concerned and do not want anyone in the transgender community to be discriminated against, or for there to be violence against any citizen, we have to recognize that the status quo cannot continue. We have to stand up for truth, and we have to stand up for our daughters who are being put in horrible situations, and it has to change.
Yes. So calling all women's rights activists, come back to the conversation, right?
Yeah,
Where'd they
absolutely.
go?
Yeah.
So then let me see. We've got Religious Freedom Restoration Act,
Right.
RIFRA. How is
RIFRA.
that
Yeah.
moving along? Tell us about
RIFRA.
that.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's very interesting, again, how this discussion has changed. So the original Religious Freedom Restoration Act was introduced by Senator Chuck Schumer, a Democrat, in 1993, I believe it was. It was in response to a court ruling that changed the way the government had previously treated issues related to religious liberty. And it was related to a Native American tribe who believed that their religious liberties were being infringed upon. So it passed with every member of the United States House of Representatives voting for it. Only 3 U.S. senators voted against it, and it was signed into law by President Bill Clinton. Now, fast forward from 1993 to 2024, and when you mention RIFRA, the left goes crazy, and they don't want it passed, even though it's in dozens of other states. Many other states, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act exists. Basically, what it does is it restores where we were before the ruling I talked about that initiated the RFRA on the federal level in 1993. It restores sort of the court precedent of there has to be a compelling government interest before you infringe on someone's religious liberty, and whatever the solution is has to be narrowly tailored. And that is what the Religious Freedom Restoration Act does in a nutshell. And it would sort of create a balancing test. It's not going to guarantee the winners and losers. It would just sort of create a balancing test where a judge or a court would have to look, where is the compelling government interest to infringe upon this person's religious liberty, and then our solution must be narrowly tailored. So in this day and time, where, let's face it, the left, there's an assault on religious liberty in this country, and you could just see it in the comments on the gender identity bill if you don't believe it. There's a real animosity toward people of faith in this country today on the side of the left, and so this would create that balancing test that I think is extremely important. I think of the Old Guards a few years ago. If you know them, they owned a wedding venue. They had employees who were gay, but when a couple came and wanted to get married in their wedding venue and the couple was gay, may have targeted them, I don't know, but they refused because of their firmly held religious convictions, and they were put out of business.
Well, and they didn't just refuse. They refused, but they also said, "Hey, there's these other options for you." They recommended some other venues, et cetera, or some other bakers. I think they were pretty kind about it.
Yeah. And so militants want to target cake makers and florists and folks who own wedding venues to try to shut them down. That's what they try to do. And so this would, this in that kind of a situation doesn't necessarily guarantee the outcome would have been different, but at least it guarantees that again, compelling government interest. And so the question could be, you could go somewhere else to have your wedding, and I don't know why you would want to have your wedding somewhere where people, due to their firmly held religious convictions, would prefer not to have it. But again, that is an instance where, it would at least create that balancing test that doesn't currently exist in Iowa law, but exists in dozens of other states and exists in federal law.
Well, and 11 years later, they're still persecuting these poor people.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And so, I think it's an important piece of legislation that we do. There's some in the business community that are opposed to it. The transgender LGBT community is opposed to it. And the left is adamantly opposed to it. Again, even though it was introduced by Chuck Schumer in 1993, it's kind of amazing how the landscape changes. Partially, I think, because you fast forward from 1993 to 2024, there's a much stronger hatred and discrimination going on toward religious liberty and toward people of faith today in our country. That's just a reality. And so I think that's why it has the opposition today that it did not have in 1993. So
where's that bill at right now?
That bill passed subcommittee. I'm on the subcommittee. And I hope that it will pass Judiciary Committee next week. We'll see. We've got a caucus on it next week, and we'll see where it goes from there.
Fantastic. Well, we'll be watching that for sure. How about illegal immigration? So that's a huge concern with the invasion going on right now at our southern border. What are your thoughts on that? What is Iowa doing about that? What are our legislators working on?
Yeah. So I want to begin a discussion by saying I know that there are a lot of individuals coming across the southern border who just want a better life. They're trying to escape drug cartels, and they're trying to escape the misery in their own country to try to come and live the American dream. And I do not fault those folks. I fault the federal government and its abdication of its responsibilities to enforce our immigration laws, to pass reasonable, sensible immigration laws that work, and to close our border. That's the federal government's fault, not the folks that want to come here for a better life. But it's also true that there's a lot of folks coming across the border that are not those folks that want to come for a better life. There's gang members. There are lots of military age folks coming across our border. And I think a terrorist would be, engaging in malfeasance if there weren't terrorists coming across the border to raise havoc in our country at a time of their choosing. So we have a nightmare situation going on our border, and there's nothing moral about what is being allowed on our border. That's the thing that blows me away, that the left, wants to, number one, they want to confuse legal immigration with illegal immigration. There's a major difference. But they also act as if it's moral to allow what is happening on our border. It isn't. You're allowing drug cartels to traffic human beings. You're allowing sex trafficking. You're allowing labor trafficking. It's disgusting beyond belief. And you're allowing fentanyl to come across our border and kill our citizens. It's a nightmare. It is unbelievable that this is taking place in our country because we have an administration that has absolutely refused to do its duty to the American people and to the Constitution. I think that alone is probably grounds to consider impeachment against the president. In any event, what we're trying to do in the state of Iowa in response to that is stand up, number one, in support of Texas. We've sent the governor has sent the National Guard and state troopers to Texas several times. We stand in support of what they're trying to do on the border right now. And the governor was pretty strong coming out, joining other governors on that issue. But we're moving a number of bills related to illegal immigration. We're number one. I have a bill moving in judiciary that would create a definition for human smuggling, which basically involves an individual transporting illegal individuals across, into Iowa. Right now, we had a situation told to us that DPS couldn't even. There was a large group of individuals in a car, clearly not here legally, including two children. They were ultimately able to take the two children and put them into our, Health and Human Services system because nobody in the car could prove that those children belonged to them. So those children were probably on their way to being trafficked. God help us. Mm-hmm. But the rest of those individuals, ICE was contacted, and ICE said, "Not our problem. We're not doing anything about it." Ultimately, law enforcement just had to let these people go on their way after taking the children away. So that these 10 individuals, all from, or however many there were, all from different countries. We hope that, and we're working, with appropriate authorities. We hope we can create this definition of smuggling that would allow the state law enforcement authorities to apprehend these people, even if ICE doesn't cooperate, and get them out of the state. So that's one of the initiatives.
Is that in drafting, or is that?
No, it's out of drafting, and it will be going through the subcommittee and committee process.
Has it been assigned a bill number?
It is. I wish I could give you that, Oliver. Okay. I can't. I can research that for you and give it to you because there's so many bills. I just don't know the bill numbers. I know the subjects, but I believe it's already passed out of subcommittee.
Oh, great!
And we'll go from there. And then we also are saying, look, we need the region universities and those universities that receive state money for assistance programs like, tuition grants and those sorts of things. You need to be able to prove that you're in the state legally and in the country legally to receive any kind of state-funded tuition assistance, because we don't think that the people of Iowa, hardworking taxpayers, should have their taxpayer money going to fund someone's college education that are not here legally. Now, we're not talking about, let me make this clear, you can be in the country legally and not be a citizen, and that's not who we're talking about. If you're in the country legally and you're not a citizen, but you otherwise would be eligible for these programs, maybe you're working toward your citizenship or whatever, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about people that cannot provide documentation that they're in the country legally. So we're talking about illegal immigration. We don't think those folks should be eligible for tuition assistance or state-funded assistance with college. The same thing would apply to any kind of assistance programs, entitlement programs. We think folks ought to have to prove that they're in the country legally, not necessarily citizens, but are in the country legally before they could receive those types of assistance programs. So we have a lot of those things moving.
What's the path for someone, say someone came illegally, and they're not a drug dealer, they've broken the law, they came here illegally, right, but they're working or wanting to work or whatever else. Is there a path for them to citizenship?
Not currently, that I'm aware of. And one of the things that we hear is Health and Human Services currently, you should not be able to receive assistance if you're not here legally, but somehow it's happening. Either it's fake identification, fake information, whatever. We hear the same thing with the E-Verify system, that there's plenty of folks that are being cleared by E-Verify that are not in the country legally because they're providing false information that's passing the test. And so it's a huge issue we're dealing with. But what we're looking at is there's horrific labor trafficking trafficking going on, and it's happening in Iowa. There are people, I think, probably living under really bad living conditions that are working here that are not in the country legally, and it's almost like the slave trade. I mean, it's modern day slavery is what it is. They're not being paid proper wages. They're not living in good conditions, and there's labor trafficking and sex trafficking going on right under our noses as a result of all this illegal immigration. It needs to stop, and there's nothing moral or humane about it. And employers need to recognize there's nothing moral and humane about it, and you should not be participating in it. And I know it's hard today to get workers and labor, but this is beyond immoral. And so these are all the things that we're working toward trying to address.
What are some of the steps in at least that one? We talked about the smuggling individuals definition, the illegals not getting funding for university or state funding. What about the slave labor?
Yeah. So that's the part of the, we're trying to, we got a supply and demand situation going on here. So we're trying to work through what else can we do? The E-Verify system, the Senate has a bill moving to require E-Verify in Iowa. We had a bill, it did not advance because again, it just doesn't seem to be, it's sort of a garbage in, garbage out situation. There seems to be plenty of folks that are being green lighted by E-Verify that are not in the country legally. So there's no easy answers, Oliver. We're
So
trying to look at, yeah, go ahead.
What happens when, if we ship all the illegals out and now it takes, three times longer to build an apartment building and 3 times more money. I mean, how do you balance that?
Well, that's the challenge we have, and that's why there's a lot of discussions. I think realistically, we all have to recognize we don't know how many millions of people are in the country illegally right now.
Right.
How many of them are otherwise, now they broke the law to come here, but they're otherwise law-abiding citizens, and they're working in our communities, and they're performing vital functions. I think anybody that believes we could just turn on a switch and deport these 11 or millions of people without collapsing the economy are delusional. I mean, you're not going to be able to do that. So that's
sure.
one of the discussions that has to happen on the federal level, because that's not a realistic thing to do. And people say, well, there shouldn't be a path to citizenship for people that broke the law. I get that, but there ought to be maybe some sort of a path, or at least we have to have a discussion about if somebody's came here illegally but otherwise haven't broken the law and are productive members of our community. Do we create some sort of a status that would allow them to continue to work here? And deport the folks that are actually breaking the law and that are actually, not being productive citizens, gang members, or whatever. So that's. But this thing is so polarized; it's incredible. I mean, so
I think that's the path. There has to be a balance. Yeah, because you're right. Yeah. We would collapse the economy. There are good people here that are working and want to work, right. And we have such a lack. To your point earlier with the guaranteed wages, we have, it's a struggle to get people to work.
Right. And I think principle and practicality have to meet in the middle. Principle is absolutely essential, but we have to be practical. There's no way you're going to deport millions and millions of people with the flip of a switch and not expect the economy to collapse. And also the morality of that also, has to be considered as well. Because again, I would say again, blame who it is rightfully to blame, and it's the federal government for not having an immigration system that is workable. And so that's the situation we find ourselves in.
We have an open border. We have over 6 million illegal immigrants come through in the last 3 years. I've heard reports of a plane flying in with young Chinese men, and they're coming across the border with their backpacks and their slacks and nice shirts and
yeah. And what is not acceptable also is that we have people living under, basically in darkness in this state and in this country that are being labor trafficked. They're not being paid minimum wages. They're not being paid appropriately. They're being hidden in darkness, and they're engaged, and it's labor trafficking. It is modern day slavery. If we have a system in place that actually is functional and working, people can come to the country and work and perform these jobs, but also be getting the proper wage and being treated in a moral way, which is not happening right now. That's why this whole thing is so immoral at its core and has to change.
What industries do you think are served by the more slave-like trade labor?
Well, I have to believe it's likely happening in some of our agriculture. But I don't know. I mean, that's one of the things
That's a
that
tough, yeah.
there's a lot of darkness going on here. But I think most certainly there's probably a lot of illegal immigration they're involved in agriculture. I mean,
Do we have some
and
sort of task force in Iowa that's ferreting that type of situation out, or this illegal trafficking or sex trafficking or child trafficking or whatever else?
well, I mean, there's a number of things we've done in the last few years to address trafficking. We created a position, I believe it was in the Department of Public Safety. Their sole focus is on human trafficking and what we can do to eradicate that. We've had a number of laws that we passed in the last few years, increased penalties for those convicted of trafficking. What else can also a lot of things we've done to try to support victims of human trafficking. So there's a lot of things like that going on to try to address these issues. But again, as long as the southern border is open as it is, and the federal government is shipping people into states on buses and airplanes and not bothering to tell government officials in those states, we're going to have a nightmare scenario that continues. And so the first thing we have to do is secure the border. And
With
we've got to get the politics out of it. We've got to enforce the border. We've got to close the border, and then we've got to have sensible immigration policies that address these issues.
with your military background, and I don't know if everyone knows this, but Representative Holt is a decorated Marine. Tell us just a snidbit about your Marine experience and your military experience.
Well, thank you. I spent 20 years in the Marine Corps. I served from 1976 to 1996. I was a drill instructor for 5 years. If folks are familiar with what those guys do, so I spent 5 years as a drill instructor, 2 years in San Diego, and 3 years in Pensacola. It was a relatively peaceful period of time that I served in the Marine Corps. The biggie was the first Gulf War during my service, and so yeah. And then when I retired from the Marine Corps, I was in law enforcement for 4 years before coming to Iowa.
So, with your background, and thank you for your service, with your background, do you believe that we should take the military down and secure the border with our military?
If that's what it takes, 100% yes. I think we need to do whatever it takes to secure the border as humanely as possible, but whatever it takes to secure the border, we need to do it. I think it's a combination of walls. It's a combination of technological walls. It's a combination of drones. It's a combination of personnel. And probably initially the military down there to do what's got to be done to lock the border down. It is an invasion, and as I said before, there's good people coming across, but there's also gang members, military age members. I have no doubt there are probably terrorists coming across the border. It's just unbelievable what is happening. We got to do what it takes to protect the sovereignty of the country, which is what Governor Abbott's trying to do in Texas, and why we strongly support him down there and what he's trying to do. We're almost, I fear, at a Fort Sumter moment. If the federal government gets stupid and tries to stop Texas and I know one Democrat called for the seizing of the Texas National Guard. I think if the Biden administration was to do something that stupid, we're going to have the beginning of a very bad time in this country. We're very close already. And so they need to be very careful. And folks need to recognize that states absolutely, and the Supreme Court got it wrong a few weeks ago. The Supreme Court got it wrong. I'm sorry, the U.S. Supreme Court got it wrong. There's plenty of places in the U.S. Constitution that allow for states to protect themselves against an invasion and against an assault on their sovereignty. And the U.S. Supreme Court got it wrong, either because they were cowardly or they're just, they're not willing to read the Constitution carefully. There's an excellent article in the Epoch Times that lays out why there is a constitutional argument for states to be able to protect themselves when the federal government abdicates its responsibility.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I was happy to see all the support. There was a letter of support, I think, signed by 24 states or something, or governors.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
That supported Governor Abbott in his actions.
Yep.
protecting his border. I mean,
Absolutely.
you
He's
have
doing
to
the
do
right
that.
thing. Yep.
What about eminent domain and the carbon pipeline issue? Are we going to see any other legislation for that, or?
Yeah, I ran a bill this week out of subcommittee, or actually, Representative Charlie Thompson ran the bill out. He's the chair of the committee. I worked very closely with Representative Charlie Thompson, Representative Helena Hayes, Representative Cindy Golding, and I'm sure I forgot someone, but there's a group of about 10 or 12 legislators that are strongly in support of our landowners in Iowa. So the legislation we're advancing this year would allow a certain number of legislators to be able to sign on to stop eminent domain if there's concerns about the constitutionality of it. It also has a provision that any constitutional questions would be decided by declaratory judgment, gives a lot of strong protections against the improper use or unconstitutional use of eminent domain. So basically on the ones that are questionable, such as the CO2 pipeline that is not a public use, but rather a private economic development project, it would allow senators and representatives to step in and have the final word on whether that eminent domain is granted. And that's, we're electable. We are responsible to the people, held accountable to the people every 2 years in the House and 4 years in the Senate. So we think that's an appropriate way to do it and to move forward. And so that passed out of subcommittee. Charlie Thompson has worked very hard on that, and the others that I mentioned, Representative Helena Hayes and Cindy Golding, myself. So that passed out of subcommittee, and we will see where it goes in Judiciary Committee in the coming weeks.
Well, fantastic. Is there anything else that you want to cover before we wrap up?
No, I don't think so. It's great to talk to you, and
You
I
too.
think we don't always do the best thing in Iowa. We don't always do, the eminent domain is a classic case. I think that the bill we passed last year should have passed in the Senate and gone to the governor. But I'm still very, very proud of and grateful that we do live in a state where you have a lot of freedom fighters that are fighting for the future of the country and fighting for the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And so even though we don't always get it right, I think we should feel very grateful and blessed and continue to pray for the elected officials that are doing their best in a very, very monumental moment in our history.
Yes, certainly. And thank you for your service, for being a patriot and always standing up for the people of Iowa. We're lucky to have you there serving us.
Well, thank you, Oliver. Like I said, there's a lot of folks in the fight, the governor and a number of senators and representatives. So I'm grateful that I can be a part of it.
Well, we'll keep an eye out and keep following legislation and supporting you where we can. So
Sounds
you have a
great.
blessed day. Thanks for joining us. And
Thank you.
if you like this episode, please like, subscribe, and share. And Representative Holt and I will be doing this a little more regularly, following up on what's going on and letting you know what's going on and how you can be involved. We put out calls to action on some of this legislation, and we lay out what the legislation is, links to it, how to comment, who to email. And so please look for those, because as we saw before earlier in this week, sometimes the left will show up in mass, and we need to make sure we're doing the same so that our legislators can know how we feel about the issues.
Absolutely. Oliver, we got to be just as dedicated to saving the country as the other side is at destroying it.
Yes, for sure. Our liberties we prize and our rights we will maintain. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. God bless. Have a good day.
You too.